Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordy and Glory video. In today's episode, we will be doing a super heavy showdown, taking a look at the biggest tanks in the Imperial Guard. I will be taking a look at every single one of these battlefield behemoths, covering their advantages and disadvantages. In my humble opinion, every single Guard player should own at least one Beyblade or other super heavy. They really are just a great centerpiece for your collection, either on the display shelf or the tabletop. And without further ado, let's unleash 11 barrels of hell and dive right into today's episode. So the first thing to know is there are 8 super heavies that you can pick from in your Guard Codex. You have the Bane Blade, the Bane Hammer, the Bane Sword, the Doom Hammer, the Hell Hammer, the Shadow Sword, the Storm Lord, and the Storm Sword. They're all some form of Bane or Hammer or Sword or Blade. Each of these tanks is unique and each one brings a different flavor of badass to the tabletop. However, they can broadly be broken down into 3 different categories: the big ass battle tank, the supersized stug, or the mega transport. The big ass battle tanks do what they say on the tin. They are huge upscaled versions of your MBTs like the Leman Russ and the Rogel Dawn. They are focused purely on firepower and doing damage to the enemy, and as a result, they tend to be a little bit less specialized and a bit more take all comers. The defining feature of the big ass battle tanks is they come with more guns than the other super heavies. Every single one comes with an inbuilt hull demolisher cannon, a coaxial autocannon, and a heavy stubber. Moving on, we have the supersized stugs. These tend to be more specialized with a bigger main gun, but come with less support weapons. In this category, you will find tanks like the infamous Shadow Sword, which comes with one of the most powerful guns in all of Warhammer 40k, and it is specialized in dealing with enemy super heavies and titans. Naturally, by being more specialized, they tend to be very good at doing one thing, but they can struggle to be a bit more take all comers. However, at the end of the day, we are talking about a big tank strapping on loads of firepower, so no matter what situation you find yourself in, it will be able to contribute a heck of a lot. The reason I call them supersized stugs is purely based on their aesthetic appearance. Unlike the big ass battle tanks who have their main weapons housed in a turret, these supersized stugs tend to have their huge main weapons fixed in a casemate. Next up, we have the Mega Transport. What makes this variant of Guard super heavy so interesting and unique is that it can transport up to a platoon's worth of infantry inside it. Not only is this a great way to keep your infantry protected, but it also allows you to lead a proper armored fist into no man's land. There is very little in the game which will be able to stop a mega transport getting to that middle objective, disembarking a buttload of infantry and then sticking around to support them holding that ground. They also have another unique feature, which is their firing deck. This special rule allows infantry embarked on the transport to be able to shoot out of it, supplementing and supporting its already considerable damage output. So that covers all of the different category of Guard Super Heavy. Now let's take a look at some general stats for each one of these battle fortresses. Each Lord of War in the Codex comes with the same basic stat line. They have a movement of 10, weapon skill 5+, ballistic skill 4+, strength 9, toughness 9, 30 wounds, 9 attacks, leadership 8, and a 2+ save. There is one exception to this stat line, and that is the Mega Transports. They are slightly less durable as a result of having an exposed firing deck. And so rather than coming with 30 wounds, they come with 28. It is only a small difference in durability, but it is worth noting. And as a player, you need to decide what you would rather have, the firing deck or the 2 extra wounds. Another important thing to note is despite the fact aesthetically some of the super heavy weapons are in turrets and some of the super heavy weapons are fixed in position, all of the main weapons for your guard super heavies, be it a Shadow Sword, Bane Sword, Hell Hammer, Beyblade, it doesn't matter, all of them come with the turret weapon special rule. This means that despite the fact you have a fairly basic ballistic skill of 4+, all of your main guns will actually be hitting on a 3+. Now, I want to be 100% clear about this. It is just the main gun and the main turret that gets the turret weapon special rule. If you are building your super heavies and they've got the sponsons with the small turret las cannons, they do not benefit from it. If you are building a Beyblade or a Hellhammer and you've got that small twin double heavy bolt turret in the hull, that does not get turret weapon. It's only the big guns on the supersized Stugs and the Mega Transports and the main proper turrets in the Hellhammer and the Beyblade that get turret weapon. Finally, each guard Lord of War comes with 3 shared datasheet abilities and weapons. Every single one of them is going to come with the Armored Tracks special rule inbuilt. This is similar to what you'll find on your Lehman Russes and your Rogal Dawns and your other vehicles, but for them you have to pay 5 points to upgrade them to have Armored Tracks. When it comes to your Super Heavies, they get it inbuilt. This ability gives your Beyblade +1 armor save versus damage 1 weapons, which makes them significantly more durable against small arms firepower. In addition to the armor tracks, they also come equipped with adamantium tracks. This is actually a melee weapon for your super heavies, and considering most other guard vehicles don't come with any kind of specialized melee weapon, it is one that can be very easy to overlook. This weapon gives your Beyblade attacks AP -2 and also a flat damage of 2, which makes them surprisingly good in combat. If you use the Crush Them stratagem on one of your super heavies, it's going to get 9 attacks, hitting on 3s at AP -2, strength 9 and damage 2, which makes them weirdly good in close combat. Lastly, when the Beyblade is destroyed, if it then explodes, it really does go up like a firework display. In fact, it does D6 mortal wounds to all units within a 2d6 inch radius. And that covers all of the general points around your guard super heavies. Look, at the end of the day, guys, they're a Lord of War unit. They're going to be a huge unit on the battlefield. They're going to come with a crap load of firepower, incredible durability, but you're going to have to pay a lot of points for them. But now, let's start taking a look at the fine detail and reviewing each one of the guard super heavies. So the first one that we are going to be reviewing is the Beyblade, the classic guard big tank. This unit has been immortalized in the Dawn of War video games, and as a result, it is probably the most popular and favorite super heavy for many guard commanders. If you are at a gaming hall and you see someone over on the far side suddenly start shouting, "It is the Beyblade!" or "Ready to unleash 11 barrels of hell," or "All guardsmen, follow me to glory," then you know that that player is probably fielding a Beyblade. Each Beyblade comes with a Beyblade cannon and a coaxial autocannon. It also comes with a hull demarcher cannon and twin heavy bolter and a heavy stubber. It then comes with a set of 2 sponsons as standard, and each one of these sponsons is going to have a las cannon and double heavy bolter in it. As is the case with all guard super heavies, you can add an additional set of sponsons. Each one of these is going to come with another las cannon and double heavy bolter, which means a fully maxed out guard Beyblade is going to come with 4 sponsons, which is a hell of a lot of firepower. The sponson double heavy bolters can be swapped out for double heavy flamers if you want to, making the tank very nasty when it gets up close and personal, and also almost impossible to charge. Because if you charge a Beyblade that is wielding 8 heavy flamers in total, you will be very lucky to make it to that target without getting burnt to a crisp. Now, the main Baneblade cannon has a 72-inch range. It fires 3d6 shots at strength 9, AP-3, and a flat 3 damage. This is a really nice take all-comers weapon profile. It's got the range to be able to get into any length of firefight. It has got a high volume of fire, and the 3d6 does give it a bit of reliability with the average of 10 shots. And also the strength of 9 means that unless it is going up against the toughest of targets in Warhammer 40k, it should be wounding everything it comes across on 2s or 3s. And the AP-3 and flat damage 3 means that even the most armored targets will more than likely be on a very poor armor save or kicked onto their invulnerable save, and if they do fail whatever saving throw they happen to have, the flat damage of 3 is going to tear a chunk out of them, just kill them, or overwhelm any sort of feel no pain mechanic they might have. Combining this very steady weapon profile with all of the additional fire support that the Baneblade comes with, and it's not hard to see why it has been a favorite of the guard community for a very long time. The Beyblade is neither the most expensive or the cheapest Lord of War you can field. It comes in with a base cost of 430 points, but don't forget you have to take that first set of sponsons on it, which means that it actually comes in at 470. The Baneblade is sort of like the Swiss Army knife of Guard Super Heavies. It's kind of like the autocannon of the Lord of War options. It is never going to be the best super heavy for any situation, but it's never going to be the worst super heavy either. And it's this ability to go into any battlefield situation and be able to contribute significantly, which I think is its greatest strength. For example, you may go into a Horde army and your Baneblade has a good rate of fire with all those extra bolters and demolisher cannons to be able to deal with Hordes relatively effectively. It's not going to be as good as the Stormlord at dealing with Hordes, but it's still going to be able to do a decent amount of damage to them. Likewise, it might not be as good at dealing with enemy Titans as the Shadow Sword, but that main gun plus the whole demolisher cannon is going to allow it to engage those other super heavies and at least be able to go toe to toe with them. If you are looking at adding just a single one of these large tanks to your army, perhaps as a centerpiece model, then I would highly encourage you to get the Baneblade. It is a timeless model, a bit like the El Clasico Lehman Russ. If you've seen my best Lehman Russ loadout videos, it's never the best, it's never the worst, but it's always usable and it's always decent on the tabletop. However, having said that, there are a couple of disadvantages of the Baneblade you need to be aware of. The main gun is very swingy. That 3d6 shots means that one turn you might just get 3 shots out of your main tank. And the next turn it could get as many as 18. And so you may find that you need to keep a CP in your back pocket so that if you do get a really bad number of shots on that main gun, you can spend that CP to re-roll the dice. It's also important to understand that the Demolisher Cannon on the Baneblade is different to the Demolisher Cannon on the Lehman Russ. The Baneblade Demolisher Cannon is much more swingy. It is heavy D6 shots, but it's also only D6 damage. The Lehman Russ variant has the same number of shots, but at least on the other end is D3 plus 3 damage. So again, it is a very swingy tank. Some turns it's going to be blasting everything in front of it. Some turns it's going to feel like a little flag with pop comes out the end. And finally, the one last little fly in the ointment is it just feels really wrong to me that the Rogel Dawn tank actually has a more powerful main weapon than the Baneblade. The Rogel Dawn gun is strength 10. It's the same AP, but it's flat damage 4. I don't know, that just doesn't seem right. But that covers all of the pros and cons around the Baneblade, and overall it gets a thumbs up from me. And it is my personal favourite. I like the fact that it is a classic Guard Super Heavy, and it has always been the poster child for our Lord of Wars, and I like the fact that it's timeless. I don't know what's going to happen in the next Codex or with the next edition. Perhaps the Stormlord will suddenly become the most meta one. Maybe the Hellhammer will be in the toilet. Who knows? What I do know is that there is a very good chance that whatever happens, whatever changes come around the corner, the Beyblade will still be a usable tool in my toolbox. But next up we have the Hellhammer, and this is our other big ass battle tank. Like the Beyblade, it comes with that hull demolisher cannon, the coaxial autocannon, and also that bonus heavy stubber. However, unlike its sister tank, the Hellhammer is a bit more specialized towards an anti-infantry role. The main gun, the Hellhammer cannon, only has a 36-inch range, but it does fire 3d6 plus 6 shots at strength 7, AP -2, and damage 2. The extra d6 shots makes it a really reliable gun, and in fact, on average, this thing's going to be putting out 16 to 17 shots from its main gun alone every single turn. On top of this, the Hellhammer cannon ignores light cover, which makes it a fantastic tool for digging out entrenched infantry on an objective. It's easy for players to make the mistake of thinking that the Hellhammer is a purely anti-infantry weapon, but it's not. At its core, it is still a big-ass battle tank, and so it's happy to be thrown into any battlefield situation. In terms of its anti-tank, it's still coming with 2 lance cannons and a demolisher cannon as standard. The 6 heavy bolters that it gets between the hull and the sponsons also give it a great volume of fire for dealing with light infantry. And the volume of strength 7 shots that you're getting from the autocannon plus the Hellhammer cannon combined means that it's happy to be thrown into both armored targets, at which point the volume of fire will eventually grind them down, or into hordes where you need that high rate of fire to be able to chew through the bodies. The main disadvantage of the Hellhammer is not its damage output, but is its very expensive price point. It is the most points intensive super heavy out of any of the ones we're going to be looking at today. At its base cost, it is 450 points. Then you take into account the mandatory sponsons and you're looking at 490 points for one model. Another thing to be aware of, which is neither an advantage or a disadvantage, is the fact that the main gun has changed a huge amount from previous iterations. It used to have more strength, more AP, and more damage than the Beyblade, but the same number of shots. And you were just paying more for it to have that better gun. Now, it has the lower strength AP and damage, but it puts out a much more reliable number of shots, and it can put out 24 shots maximum in comparison to the Beyblade's 18 maximum. The reason I mention this change is because we might have some long-beard players out there who are returning to the guard with the new 9th edition book, and they're saying, this doesn't sound like my old beloved Hellhammer, this sounds like a very different unit. And it is different, and it's just something to be aware of when you're deciding if you want to field this tank or not. But taking all that into account, does the Hellhammer get the thumbs up, or does it get the thumbs down? Well, actually, I'm going to give it neither. I'm going to stay on the fence with this one and say that it is a middling super heavy. I think that the firepower you get from it is fantastic. But the problem is it's just such a high price point. It's so points intensive. And there are other super heavies that we're going to be taking a look at that put out more than enough firepower for a significantly reduced points cost. Overall, I would say that the Hellhammer is a good unit and you'll have a lot of fun putting it in your army, and you're not going to be punished for fielding it, but you are going to be running a less efficient unit overall than some of the other Lord of Wars that you have access to. Speaking of which, we move on to the Bane Sword, which arguably is the best guard super heavy right now. This beast is the first of the supersized stugs that we're going to be taking a look at, and it comes with a Quake cannon. This has a range of 96 inches, it's heavy D6 plus 6 shots, strength 14, AP -4, and damage 4. The number of shots you're getting from this vehicle is very reliable, at an average of 9 or 10 every single turn. It also has the highest strength, AP, and damage out of any of the super heavies we've looked at so far. It doesn't come with an autocannon or a demolisher, and it also doesn't come with a heavy stubber. So you might be saying to me, Mordian Glory, why is this thing so good? Well, it comes down to the fact that it is the cheapest guard super heavy you can add into your army. At its base points cost, it's only 390 points. When you add into account that first set of mandatory sponsons, you're looking at 430. This makes it 40 points cheaper than a Beyblade and 60 points cheaper than a Hellhammer. But rather than just sitting on those spare points or using them to buy another unit, what you actually want to do with them is use them to buy your Bane Sword an extra set of sponsons, which will cost you 40 points. This is going to cause it to cost the same as a Beyblade, but unlike a Beyblade, you have a much more reliable main gun. The average number of shots that the Quake Cannon puts out is between 9 and 10. That's the same as the Beyblade. Except, whilst the Beyblade has that risk of going down to a minimum of 3 shots, Quake Cannon has a minimum of 7 shots. This means that the main gun is never going to fail you at that worst possible moment. And continuing in the same vein, the Bane Sword with 4 sponsors is going to come with 4 las cannons. This more than makes up for the lack of demolisher cannon, which is a very short ranged weapon. If you're using your Beyblade properly, you actually don't want to be in range of that demolisher cannon, and so often it's not going to fire. But the 4 las cannons have got a 48-inch range, and they always fire 4 shots. No more swingy, unreliable number of shots. The big thing that you get from the Bane Sword is that it costs the same as a Bane Blade, but it's just way more reliable. And last but certainly not least, it comes with 10 heavy bolters, 2 in the front and 2 in each set of sponsons. This is going to give you a huge volume of fire. The one thing that this tank was struggling with was hordes, but 30 heavy bolter shots is going to rinse through everything from marine squads to big hordes of boys and little termagants. When you add all this together, you have a super heavy that truly is take all comers. It has enough firepower to deal with any big targets that you're going to come across between that Quake Cannon and those 4 las cannons. And it has more than enough volume of fire to deal with even the largest of hordes. I actually did a dedicated video on the Bane Sword going through why I think it is the best super heavy, and I go into excruciating detail on how this model can interact with stratagems and regimental doctrines and loads of other stuff as well. If you're interested in watching that video, I will link it on the end screen of this one. But if the Bane Sword is the ultimate take-all-comer unit, then this next super heavy is the ultimate specialist unit. The Shadow Sword is a specialized Titan Slayer. If you know that you're going to be facing off against Imperial Knights or other super heavies in your local meta, then make sure you are bringing a Shadow Sword along. When you need to cut a Imperial Knight in half in a single turn, accept no substitutes. This infamous tank is the ultimate big dick energy. When you throw a Shadow Sword down on the table, your opponent knows you are not fucking around. The reason this tank is so beloved by the guard community and so feared by our enemies is because of its awesome volcano cannon. This is one of the most powerful weapons in Warhammer 40k. I'm not just talking about the Guard Codex, I'm talking about the whole game. It has a 120-inch range. You can shoot this thing from your table, probably onto the tournament table next to you. It has a heavy D3+3 number of shots at strength 18, which means you wound anything in the game on 2s, even other super heavies. And it has an AP of 5 and a flat damage of 12. Statistically, the Volcano Cannon has a chance of killing an enemy Imperial or Chaos Knight in a single volley. With an average of 5 shots, you should get 3 hits. That's not taking into account any reroll ones that you might have available. It's then going to wound with all 3 of those. Each one of those dice is going to wound on a 2+. More than likely, you're going to get all 3 through. Your opponent's knight has a 5+ invulnerable save, which means that they should stop 1 of those 3 wounds. That means they will take 2 of them, which is 24 damage, which is enough to kill a knight outright. Now, I know, of course, there will be a lot of people down in the comment section right now saying, Morning Glory, you've not taken into account rotate iron shields. What if the Night House has more than 24 wounds? What if they've got to feel no pain? Of course, there are a myriad of factors that could alter the outcome. But I haven't taken into account any of the factors that could improve the outcome for the Shadow Sword. If we just look at a standard Volcano Cannon shot from a standard Shadow Sword against a standard enemy knight, then every single time, statistically, the Shadow Sword should kill it. And there are very few other units in the game which can make such a claim. It truly is the epitome of the go big or go home philosophy. However, the Shadow Sword does have a couple of disadvantages. Firstly, it does not ignore invulnerable saves. Combine this with the fact that it has a low number of shots, and you have a unit that really struggles against armies like Custodes, for example, which come with a standard inbuilt 4+ invulnerable save. It sounds very impressive when you say you can kill a knight in one go. It sounds less impressive when you say you can kill 1 or 2 Custodian Guard in a go. And the other problem with this magnificent beast is it's 450 points base. It's 490 with the sponsons. And that makes it the same as a Hellhammer. And when you add together these 2 disadvantages, you do have a vehicle that has a pretty big Achilles heel because it's very specialized. And if you go against its preferred target, you are going to feel like it is an absolute bargain because when it fires 1 volley and it kills that knight, it's going to earn its points back in 1 go. Great, brilliant. But when you then take it into a scenario that it's not designed to deal with, it's going to feel like a big paperweight. And you're going to wish you ended up taking 3 Lehman Russes instead of this thing. And so I would say that the Shadow Sword is brilliant, but it is over-specialized. So overall, taking this into account, I am going to give the Shadow Sword a very sad and very reluctant thumbs down. I don't want to, guys. And I know a lot of people are going to go into the comment section and defend this tank. And I know that they're going to make loads of great points. But from my perspective as a competitive player, looking at something that I can take to a tournament, I just can't take the Shadow Sword. Because if I go to a tournament and I don't come across a super heavy for 5 games, I have actively handicapped myself by taking this unit. I would have been better off taking its equivalent points in other support units like Rogel Dawns or Lehman Russes. And whilst it is a incredibly cool vehicle and it boasts one of the most awesome weapons that I have ever seen in Warhammer 40k, it's this lack of take-all-comer ability. It's this over-specialization which just makes it completely unsuitable for any kind of competitive list. If I was to sum up the Shadow Sword in one sentence, I would quote Lord Commander General Zaphod Beeblebrox. 10 out of 10 for style, minus several million for good thinking. Next up, we have the Storm Sword, another of our super-sized stugs. Now, this vehicle really is not a common sight on the battlefield. I honestly can't tell you the last time I ever saw one of these in any game hall that I've been to. It sort of feels like the red-headed stepchild of the Guard Lord of Wars, and it struggles to find its niche in amongst its brothers and sisters. The weird thing about the Storm Sword is it's not a bad vehicle at all, and I actually quite like the look of the Storm Sword siege cannon. This gun boasts a 60-inch range, more than adequate for most firefights in Warhammer 40k. It's going to outrange a lot of heavy support choices of your enemy. It's got heavy D6 plus 6 shots, making it reliable like the Bane Sword. It's got a strength of 12 and AP minus 4, which means that you're going to be able to sling this into even enemy knights and super heavy, still wound them on 3s. Any light or armor or heavy infantry going to be wounding on 2s. AP minus 4 means that you're going to be either kicking them onto no armor save or onto their invulnerable save. And the damage of D3 plus 3 makes this thing like a big demolisher cannon, but it's way more reliable. I think the reason we don't see the siege cannon around very much is because it kind of struggles to outdo any of the other tanks out there. It's got a reliable gun, but it's not as powerful as the Bane Sword, which has a strength of 14, or the Shadow Sword, which has a strength of 18. Got a decent amount of shots coming out of it, but not as many as the Hammer or the Beyblade. It ignores cover, but it doesn't really need to ignore cover because it has AP minus 4 anyway. So most infantry that you shoot at are going to be dying, and if they're on a 2+ save anyway, they're probably going to have some sort of invulnerable save because they'll be like a Terminator. It's not the cheapest, but it's not the most expensive. Coming in at 420 points, it's actually bang in the middle of the pack when you compare it to the cheapest like the Bane Sword and the most expensive like the Shadow Sword and the Hammer. When I first saw the Storm Sword, I dismissed it. I just assumed it wasn't very good. But the more that I look at it, the more I start to warm towards its profile, and the more I start liking it. It's this weird Mongol unit that is kind of a hybrid of all of the other guard super heavies combined. And so, weirdly, somehow, this thing has become the ultimate take-all-comers guard Lord of War. And so, just by default, that actually makes it pretty good. If you could include a unit in your army, and you can be confident that no matter what army you face off against, it's going to perform and do well, then it can't be a bad unit. And so I'm going to have to, in a very confused manner, give the Storm Sword a thumbs up. Because when I first looked at it, I thought it was terrible. But now, I kind of want one. And I know there are going to be a lot of guard commanders in that comment section right now saying, Morty and Glory, you just gave our beloved Shadow Sword a thumbs down, and you're giving this thing we've never heard of a thumbs up. What are you on, and can I have some? And I'm going to say to you, no, it's all for me. And secondly, I'm going to say this thing is the complete opposite of a Shadow Sword. A Shadow Sword is super specialized, and it is complete form. It's all about style. But the Storm Sword is so unspecialized, and it is pure function over form. And if I could level one criticism against this thing, is that it is almost take all comers to a fault. It's almost boringly take all comers. Nothing about it distinguishes it from the other super heavies out there. If you wanted to, you could describe this tank as beige. It is the beige of our super heavies. So it is a good unit, but I would say it isn't a particularly exciting super heavy. But that covers all of our big ass battle tanks and our supersized stugs. Now we have the mega transports. And the first of these mass conveyors we shall be taking a look at is the Bane Hammer. This thing has a transport capacity for 25 infantry, and remember, because it is a mega transport, it will only have 28 wounds in comparison to the 30 wounds of the vehicles that we've looked at so far. Its main weapon is the Tremor Cannon. This has a 36-inch range. It fires 2d6 plus 3 shots at strength 10, AP minus 3, and damage 3. Overall, its main gun is alright, but that 36-inch range is a bit short, and the 2d6 plus 3 shots is quite unreliable. The plus 3 doesn't really give it any sense of reliability. Strength 10 is decent, AP minus 3 is decent, and damage 3 is okay. It's a very middling profile for its gun. The big problem with the Bane Hammer is it is somewhat living in its own shadow. It has fallen from grace in comparison to its previous iteration in our last codex. In the 8th Ed book, the Tremor Cannon, if it hit an enemy unit, halved its movement, which made it complete kryptonite against fast-moving assault armies, because their whole thing was just taken away from them. And now that ability is gone, the tank has become a lot less exciting. But I don't actually think it's a bad unit, because at the end of the day, it is actually the cheapest of the mega transports. Coming in at just 400 points base, it's actually the second cheapest super heavy that you can get. It's only 10 points more than the Bane Sword. You could do the same thing as you would to a Bane Sword and strap loads of sponsons to this thing to up its firepower, but not spend any more than you would if you were buying a Beyblade. But then you just end up asking yourself, well, why am I trying to make an inferior Bane Sword? Why wouldn't I just take the Bane Sword rather than trying to poorly emulate that with a Bane Hammer? And so you end up turning to the last thing that the Bane Hammer has in its arsenal, which is its transport capacity and the firing deck. And the problem is that even though it is a cheap super heavy, you might fool yourself into thinking, well, I could transport my men around cheaper inside this than I could inside the other mega transports. The thing is, if you're looking for cheap transportation, the Bane Hammer is not it. If you're looking for a cheap way to transport your infantry around the board, and that's the main thing you're looking for out of these units, then why wouldn't you just take Chimeras? If I want to transport about 25 infantry around the board, I can get 2 Chimeras for 170 points. And even if someone wants to be super pedantic down in the comment section and go, oh, but 24 isn't the same as 25, Chimeras can only transport 12 people each, I'd say, fine, get another Chimera in there. It's still only going to cost you 255 points. It's still way cheaper than the 440 you have to spend on the Bane Hammer. So its transport capacity role is kind of called into question, and then when you take a look at how the firing deck has been nerfed in the new book, it really does kind of kill the Bane Hammer for me. Previously, the firing deck used to say that it could transport 25 infantry and 10 infantry models could shoot out of the top. This made it really good for packing in with things like special weapon squads or heavy weapon squads, because it didn't matter if there were a few guys with lasguns sat below decks, you could have 10 special and heavy weapons popping out the top of this thing. But now the firing deck simply says that it can carry up to 25 infantry and 1 unit can shoot out of the top. This is a huge nerf, because it means that even if you had like 3 heavy weapon squads inside this thing, only 1 of them can shoot out the top and the other 2 have just got to sit below decks, meaning that the firing deck is no longer the big draw that it used to be. And so, unfortunately, I'm going to have to give the Bane Hammer a fairly resounding thumbs down, because if you're looking for cheap transportation, there are way cheaper options than this thing. And if you're looking for a cheap super heavy that can put out a lot of firepower, there are way better options than this thing. And if you're looking for a mega transport, well, there are better ones than this. And so let's move on and take a look at the Doom Hammer and the Stormlord. So here we are at our penultimate super heavy for this video. It is the Doom Hammer, another one of our mega transports. And like the Bane Hammer, it has a transport capacity for 25 infantry. The main gun of this unit is the Magma Cannon, and this is essentially a turbo multi-melter. It has a range of 48 inches, it's heavy D6 plus 3 shots, it's strength 10, AP minus 5 and damage D6 plus 2, but if you get within half range, which is 24 inches in this case, it becomes D6 plus 4. The Doom Hammer costs 420 points base, and when you take into account the mandatory sponsons, it will cost you 460 points to include in your army. Taking that all into account, I have to say that sadly, I am not a big fan of the Doom Hammer. I feel its 48-inch range is relatively low in comparison to the other super heavies that we've looked at. It's not the shortest on paper. But in reality, you need to be getting this thing into melter range. Because if you're not getting the most out of your 460 point vehicle, then you're not doing it right. This is a significant investment. It needs to be performing at peak efficiency every single turn, if at all possible. And so really this thing actually has a 24-inch range. And so really it actually is the shortest range of the super heavies. And this thing has the second lowest number of shots out of all the super heavies that we're going to be looking at. The only one that has a lower number of shots is the Shadow Sword, but that makes up for it by being strength 18 and damage 12. Two things that the Magma Cannon can't even come close to. And again, whilst AP -5 looks kind of cool on paper, in reality, it's just excessive. Unless you're ignoring invulnerable saves, you really don't need AP -5 because you are going to hit those invulnerable saves. AP -3, AP -4 really is the maximum that you need in a lot of scenarios. The moment you come across an invulnerable save, all those extra points of AP really mean nothing. And of course, there are units that don't have an invulnerable save, but those units that don't have an invulnerable save tend to be units that have an armor save that doesn't really warrant AP -5. And that just leaves us with the damage D6 plus 2, which actually is a big positive for this unit, because it means that its average damage at long range is 5 per shot, which is pretty nice. And its average damage at close range is 7. But this thing could really have spikes of damage when you think about it. Potentially, it could do 8 to 10 damage with each shot that it gets through. And I'm not going to take that potential damage output away from this vehicle. In fact, it's one of its biggest selling points. A Doom Hammer firing at maximum capacity, if it hits with every shot, wounds with every shot, and it's the melter range, and your opponent fails every save, can do 90 damage in a turn, which is really, really powerful. But sadly, we don't live in that ideal world. And unfortunately, there are a myriad of factors that, when you take into account, just cut down the Magma Cannon's effectiveness very quickly. By having such a low number of shots and not having the ability to ignore invulnerable saves, it quickly becomes susceptible to things like dense terrain and a 4+ invulnerable save. With an average shot output of 6, when you start shooting through dense terrain or your opponent has some kind of -1 to hit modifier, suddenly you're only hitting with 3 of those shots. And even once you've got those 3 hits through, there's no guarantee you're going to wound with all 3 of them. There are loads of abilities out there that reduce your to wound value. Either it's a -1 to wound, or it's transhuman physiology, one of the most common abilities that you can see out there. You can only wound me on a 4, 5, or 6. Suddenly, if you're lucky, you're going to wound with 2 out of those 3 shots, but there's a very good chance you're going to wound with 1. And then you might come across a 4+ invulnerable save. And now there's a 50-50 chance your opponent is going to make that save or not, and you're going to do any damage whatsoever. Or even if they do fail it, they could just pull out a CP reroll. There are loads of layers that go into firing a weapon like the Magma Cannon, and unfortunately, by having such a low number of shots and not having the ability to ignore invulnerable saves, you start seeing these problems cropping up. And it's kind of interesting. You can draw the same comparison to the Shadow Sword. The Shadow Sword is great at killing knights. Knights don't tend to have things like transhuman. I'm sure there's probably something out there that gives it to them. But, you know, they do have invulnerable saves. But at least when the Shadow Sword fires, it has that ability to just do 12 damage when it goes through. So even if it only gets 1 shot through, it's going to cut a knight in half. But the Magma Cannon doesn't have that. And so it has the same problems as a Shadow Sword, but none of the ways of compensating for it. And then, like with the Bane Hammer, we then start looking at the Doom Hammer as primarily a transport. And naturally, we come to the conclusion that there are cheaper and much more efficient ways of getting men around the battlefield. And you can't even argue that the Doom Hammer is necessarily a more durable way of transporting them, because it's a super heavy, and so therefore it can never take advantage of obscuring terrain. And so unlike the Chimera, which can nip from line of sight blocking terrain to line of sight blocking terrain, Doom Hammer is going to be a hell of a fire magnet straight from the get-go. So far, it's not looking good for the mega transports. We are 0 for 2. 2 of them have gone to dying by the Emperor's side. But all is not lost, for now we have the mega transport, the Stormlord. This thing is an absolute beast because it can transport up to 40 infantry. And this opens up all sorts of possibilities and is a very good unique selling point for the vehicle. By being able to transport so many infantry, it opens up loads of tactical opportunities. Firstly, you could just put 40 cheap infantry inside this thing, drive into the middle of the board, dump them out, and go, look, I've just put 40 guys on one objective. That's my objective. It's going to take you a hell of a lot to clear through all of that. If you just put 20 infantry on that objective, like with the other mega transports, then your opponent probably is going to be able to clear that. But 40 infantry is a totally different ballgame. Or you could start getting kind of fruity with it and go, you know what, I'm going to take 20 infantry, but I'm also going to take a unit of Bulgrin and a Caden Castellan and a Commissar. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drive to that objective and I'm going to get my 20 infantry out. And when the Castellan jumps out with them, he's going to order them to take cover. Suddenly they're all on a 4+ save. Very nice. If they're Krieg infantry, they're even more durable. And then the Bulgrin get out and the Commissar goes, you, Bulgrin, because I can give orders to abhumans, I'm going to give you the order that gives you OBSEC. And suddenly you're like, hang on, I've got 20 hardcore Kriegers on this objective, and now I've got a bunch of Bulgrin that are also OBSEC on here? No one's taken that objective off you. And not only that, but if the enemy tries to assault you off, you've got the Bulgrin there, whose whole job is to just either absorb damage or beat the crap out of people in close combat. Another great thing about such a high transport capacity is it goes a long way to eliminating that argument of, well, why don't you just take more Chimeras? Because if you were to take 4 Chimeras to be able to meet the carrying capacity of the Stormlord, that's going to cost you 340 points. At its base level, the Stormlord only costs 430 points, which means there's only a 90-point difference between taking the Chimeras and taking the Stormlord. And the higher expense of the Stormlord can be justified because you're getting a vehicle that is so much tougher. Those Chimeras are toughness 7, your Stormlord is toughness 9. Those Chimeras have a 3+ armor save, no armor tracks. Your Stormlord comes with armor tracks built in and has a 2+ armor save, which is a double dip on making it more durable against small arms fire. If you want to add armor tracks onto your Chimeras, go ahead, but then you're making the points difference between these two vehicles even lower. You're making a 70-point difference. Also, when we start looking at 4 Chimeras, that's a lot of vehicles that are going to be taking up room in your deployment zone. When we were looking at the Doom Hammer or the Bane Hammer, we were like, well, 2 Chimeras has the same transport capacity. Well, 2 Chimeras takes up nowhere near as much room as a Super Heavy. But 4 Chimeras is going to take up more room in your deployment zone than your Stormlord. I'm not arguing for one moment that the Chimeras are less maneuverable than the Stormlord. At the end of the day, the Chimeras will be able to squeeze through gaps that the Super Heavy simply won't be able to. But from a deployment point of view, it is something you need to take into account. Because when you start spamming so many Chimeras, you start having to talk about either having things exposed or putting things in reserve, which means they're not going to be there on the turn that you might want them there. It just means that when it comes to deployment, you might find 4 Chimeras is actually more awkward than a Stormlord. All of these points that we've made are great arguments for why I am going to be giving the Stormlord a thumbs up. But we've not even got to the best bit, which is that unlike the other mega transports that really didn't bring enough firepower to the field or didn't bring any sort of unique firepower to set them apart, the Stormlord brings the Daka. In fact, it might even bring enough Daka, because its main gun is the Vulcan Mega Bolter. This is a weapon that they normally put on Warhound Titans. It has a range of 48 inches. It is heavy, 20 shots. Bit like a Punisher cannon. It's strength 6, AP -2, and damage 2. This gun brings something to the table that we have not seen with the other Super Heavies, which is dedicated anti-horde and anti-medium infantry firepower. All of our other Super Heavies have been focused really on targeting those big enemy units, but the Vulcan Mega Bolter is bringing a lot of anti-marine infantry firepower to the table. Not only is this a unique selling point of the vehicle, but it also is actually quite meta at the moment, because Marines just lost Armor of Contempt and they all got a lot cheaper, and there is a possibility we are going to be entering into a Marine Horde meta. That means you're going to be coming across a lot of infantry with a 3+ save and 2 wounds, and the Stormlord is going to scythe those down no problem. Now, the Stormlord does have to take 2 additional sponsons as well, so that will increase its cost by 40 points, meaning that it will go up to 470 points, which is the same as a Beyblade. It could be argued that that brings the 4 Chimeras back into the equation, because even if you were to put armor tracks on the Chimeras, suddenly you're not looking at a 70-point difference, you're looking at a 110-point difference. However, we've already covered that these 70 points is more than covered by the extra durability that you're getting from the Stormlord. And then this additional 40 points, I believe, is more than acceptable considering the extra firepower that you're getting from this Super Heavy. You're getting the 20 shots from the Vulcan Mega Bolter. You're then also getting an additional 18 shots from the heavy bolters that come in the sponsons and the hull, so you're looking at 38 shots. You're then also getting 2 heavy stubbers, which brings 6 more shots to the equation, so you're looking at 44, and the 2 lance cannons means that you're looking at 46 shots. Assuming that the Chimeras are armed with double heavy bolter, just to make this comparison a little bit easier, we're comparing damage 2 shots to damage 2 shots. 4 Chimeras, each with 6 shots, is only going to get 24 strength 5, AP -1, damage 2 shots. That is almost half of what the Stormlord is putting out. And don't forget that the Vulcan Mega Bolter actually has an extra strength and an extra AP over those Chimera heavy bolters. Of course, you could argue that I've not taken into account the Lasgun arrays, which will be putting out an extra 6 shots per Chimera. Suddenly, you're looking at 48 shots from the Chimeras versus 46 from the Stormlord. But I don't think you can really compare a Lasgun shot to a heavy bolter or Vulcan Mega Bolter shot. And so adding all of this together, I am more than happy to give the Stormlord a big, resounding thumbs up. And so we finally come to the end of the Big Guard Super Heavy Showdown. But all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Are there any Super Heavies that you think I should have given a thumbs up to, or even given a thumbs down to? Also, make sure to let me know what is your favorite Super Heavy, regardless of whether it's good or not on the battlefield. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure you smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. If you really enjoyed today's video or you found it particularly helpful, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. One of the big perks of being a channel member or patron is you gain access to the Mordian Glory Discord server. This is an online community of over 900 active members. And I want to take a moment to say a big thank you to all of the latest channel members. So thank you to Niall Jenkins, Lucas Jacobs, Adventurer Primefire, Mateo, Morcar, Slow King 20, Doomgiver, Sam, and Eat My Slamwich. I also want to do a shout out for the latest Patreon supporters as well. So a huge thank you to Eric Pidcock, Jeremy Klein, Star Jude, Ross Franklin, Jonathan Ho, Miles Andrews, and ZZZ. And last, but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So I want to say a massive thank you to Alan Blunt III, Bonbon Vert, Phil French, Ross Miller, Swordfish Trombone, Alex Dengal, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and of course, August Varney. Thank you guys. Your generous Patreon support really does make a huge difference, and it's a big part of how I'm able to do Mordian Glory full time. I hope you all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.